It was a cloudy afternoon. The sky looked tired. People walked fast on the streets, trying to avoid the cold wind. Cars passed by, but no one noticed the old man walking slowly on the sidewalk. He wore an old brown coat, black boots, and a flat, army-style cap. His back was slightly bent, and he carried a small leather bag. His face was calm, but his eyes, they looked like they had seen too much. A young police officer stood nearby, leaning against his car. His name was Officer Brad. He was new to the job, just 2 years in, and he thought he knew everything. He liked the power his uniform gave him. He liked the way people looked down when he walked past. He saw the old man crossing the street and frowned. "What's this guy doing here?" he muttered to himself. The old man walked toward the front of a tall government building, the Department of Veterans Affairs. He stopped for a moment to look at the flag waving above the door. Just then, Officer Brad walked over. "Hey," the officer said loudly. "You can't stand there." The old man turned slowly, looking at him without fear. "I'm not causing trouble," he said calmly. "You look suspicious," Brad said. "What's in the bag?" The man looked at his bag. "Just some papers." Brad stepped closer, raising his voice. "Show me your ID." The old man didn't move fast. He opened his coat slowly, not in fear, but with tired patience. Brad's hand went to his weapon. "Hurry up!" Brad snapped. People nearby started to glance at them. A young woman with her child stopped walking. A man across the street took out his phone, recording. The old man said nothing. He reached into his inside coat pocket and pulled out a small black wallet. He opened it and handed it to the officer. Brad grabbed it roughly, ready to laugh. But when he looked at the ID, everything changed. His mouth opened slightly. His eyebrows pulled together. His hand lowered from his weapon. The ID was not just a normal one. It was an official military special forces veteran ID, high level. Even more shocking, it showed Medal of Honor recipient written in bold. The photo matched. The name read, Major Thomas E. Franklin. Brad froze. He had studied military ranks in school, watched documentaries. Medal of Honor? That was the highest award anyone could get. Only real heroes received it. Heroes who had saved lives, who had walked through fire. I didn't know, Brad stammered. The old man took back his ID. "You didn't ask." The officer looked around. People were watching, some recording. The wind felt colder now. His face turned red. "You could have said something earlier," Brad said, trying to save face. The old man looked at him deeply. "I didn't need to. You could have treated me with respect from the start." There was no anger in his voice, no shouting, just quiet truth, the kind that hits hard. Officer Brad looked down. He suddenly felt small. The old man turned to leave, but stopped after a few steps. "You wear a badge," he said over his shoulder. "So did I once. But a badge doesn't make a man strong. His actions do." And with that, he walked into the building, his back still slightly bent, but his head held high. Brad stood there, feeling like he had been hit by something heavy, but invisible. Something that didn't leave a bruise, but hurt just the same. 5. Hours earlier, Thomas Franklin woke up before the sun. He always did. Military habits never left him. He made his bed sharp and tight, just like in the army. He cooked oatmeal, black coffee, no sugar, no cream. He wore the same brown coat he always wore and polished his boots until they shone. He looked at the small photo on his shelf. A young black man in army uniform, his younger self, full of hope. He took the ID from a box. He only carried it when he visited the VA office. As he walked through the city, he noticed how people looked past him. Some crossed the street to avoid him. Some stared. Some smiled politely but walked faster. He was used to it. What they didn't see were the stories in his eyes. Stories of nights in the jungle, of pulling wounded soldiers to safety, of holding his best friend as he took his last breath, of medals and parades, and later, forgotten faces and empty thanks. When he was younger, he thought coming home would be the best day of his life. But he had returned to a world that saw his skin before his service. That didn't care about his pain. That called him names instead of sir. Years passed. He stopped talking much. What was the point? But today, he had an appointment. So he walked, quietly, slowly, with a heart full of memories, until that officer stopped him. Now. Officer Brad sat in his car thinking hard. He had mocked a hero, judged a man by his coat and his skin. He felt shame, real shame, not just embarrassment. He replayed the moment in his mind. The calm voice, the powerful eyes, the line. A badge doesn't make a man strong. His actions do. Those words stuck. Something inside Brad shifted that day. A small crack in his pride. A voice whispering, "Do better." He looked out at the city. People passed by, just like before. But now, he wondered, how many other heroes walked these streets unnoticed? Officer Brad couldn't stop thinking about the man. He sat in his car, still near the Veterans Affairs building. The air felt heavy. His hands were cold, not from the weather, but from guilt. He had mocked a man who was more than a soldier. He was a war hero. He looked again at the piece of paper where he had scribbled the name, Major Thomas E. Franklin. His hands trembled a little, a Medal of Honor veteran. He had studied about those medals in training. You don't get that kind of honor by accident. You earn it with courage, with pain, and sometimes with blood. And he had mocked him, laughed at him, treated him like a nobody. Brad stared at his own reflection in the side mirror. He didn't like what he saw. Flashback. The moment of truth. Just minutes ago, Brad had been full of power. His voice had been loud, his hand near his weapon. People were watching. His badge was shining. But when the old man handed him that badge, everything changed. He had expected something fake, maybe a driver's license or a made-up name. But what he held was solid, real, and heavy with history. The badge was black with golden letters. Department of Defense, retired. Special Forces Medal of Honor recipient. The name matched the photo. Thomas E. Franklin, born in 1949, served in Vietnam and other secret missions. The ID had a silver border and a small chip, only given to high-clearance veterans. Brad's fingers shook slightly as he handed it back. He remembered the man's words, "You didn't ask." That hit harder than any scream. Brad searched for the truth. That night, Officer Brad sat at home, unable to sleep. The TV was on, but he wasn't watching. His laptop sat open on the table. He typed the name, Major Thomas E. Franklin, Medal of Honor. Hundreds of results appeared. Newspapers, war articles, old photos, a young black soldier carrying 2 men on his back through fire, a blurred image of a helicopter landing while he shielded a wounded comrade, a quote from a general, "If not for Major Franklin, the entire team would have died that night." Brad leaned back. He felt like he had punched himself in the chest. The man had been shot 3 times in one mission, still saved his team. He had once walked 5 miles through the jungle alone, carrying 2 wounded men on his shoulders. Yet no one on the street that day looked at him like a hero. No statues, no crowds, just silence, the past, that no one talks about. Brad kept reading. There were interviews too, but not many. Thomas Franklin had never liked attention. He said little in public. In one old video, a young reporter asked him, "What do you feel when people thank you for your service?" Franklin paused, then said softly, "Sometimes silence is louder than thanks." The reporter looked confused. Franklin didn't explain. He didn't need to. The video ended with him walking away, alone. The next day, a quiet visit. Brad put on his uniform the next morning, but something felt different. He checked his badge in the mirror again, but now he didn't feel proud. He felt responsible. He went back to the Veterans Affairs building, hoping to see the old man again. Inside, the lady at the desk looked up. "I'm looking for Major Thomas Franklin," Brad said gently. She raised an eyebrow. "He comes every few weeks to pick up medicine. Why?" Brad hesitated. "I just wanted to say something." The lady smiled slightly. "Most people don't even know who he is. He saved lives in the war. He saved my uncle. But he never tells anyone." Brad nodded. "He shouldn't have to." Outside. A long walk. Home meanwhile, Thomas Franklin walked home slowly. He didn't feel angry. He had seen worse. But the officer's face had stayed in his mind. The moment of shock. The silence. That was the part that always hurt the most. The sudden change when they found out who he was. He never wanted pity. He didn't want respect because of medals. He wanted to be seen as human from the start. As he passed the local park, a young boy threw a ball near him by mistake. "Sorry, sir," the boy said, running to pick it up. Thomas nodded. "No harm done." The boy paused. "Were you a soldier?" Thomas gave a small smile. "Long time ago." The boy looked amazed. "Cool. My dad says soldiers are heroes." Thomas looked at the boy's innocent face. "Your dad's right. But real heroes are the ones who come home and still stand tall, even when the world forgets them." The boy nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing something important. Brad returned to his patrol car that evening. He didn't find Thomas Franklin again that day, but he found something else, a new way to see people. He looked around at everyone walking by. Old men, tired mothers, quiet kids, bus drivers, cleaners. Any of them could have stories. Some of them might be heroes. Some might be hurting in silence, and he had almost let power make him blind. The sun was setting behind the trees. Orange light filled the sky. Major Thomas Franklin sat alone on the small bench outside his apartment. His coat was folded neatly beside him. In his hands, he held an old photograph. The photo was worn, with a small tear at the edge. It showed 4 young soldiers smiling in their green uniforms. One of them was Thomas, just 19 years old back then. The others were Mike, Reggie, and Danny, his best friends. They were gone now. Only he was left. Flashback. Vietnam, 1969. It was hot. The kind of heat that stuck to your skin and burned your lungs. The jungle was thick. Every leaf felt like it. Was hiding something. Snakes, traps, enemies. Thomas was the youngest in his unit, but he was sharp, brave. His commander often said, "That boy sees things before they happen." Their mission that day was to rescue 2 soldiers trapped near enemy lines. It was dangerous, maybe impossible. But they had to try. Thomas led the way through the trees, holding his rifle tight, eyes scanning every corner. Reggie followed behind, whispering jokes to stay calm. Mike checked the map, and Danny covered the rear. After an hour of walking, they heard gunfire. Loud, close, they ran, through bushes, over fallen logs. Bullets hit trees around them. When they reached the site, it was worse than they thought. One soldier was already gone. The other was bleeding, crying for help. Thomas didn't think twice. He threw down his bag, pulled the wounded man over his shoulder, and ran. His friends covered him, shooting back, yelling, running too. But then an explosion. The ground shook. Everything went black. Waking up to pain, Thomas opened his eyes in the dirt. His leg burned. His side was bleeding. His ears rang. Reggie was on the ground beside him, not moving. Danny was calling his name. "Thomas, can you move?" "I'm fine," Thomas said, even though he wasn't. He looked at Reggie. One look. He knew. Mike grabbed the wounded soldier. Danny helped Thomas stand. He limped, holding onto a tree. They walked for hours, through rain and mud. Thomas didn't stop. Not once. He carried Reggie's body on his back for 2 miles. He said he wouldn't leave him behind. When they finally reached safety, the commander hugged him, tears in his eyes. "You're a damn hero," he said, but Thomas didn't feel like one. The medal months later, they gave Thomas the Medal of Honor. He stood in front of cameras, generals, and reporters. They clapped, smiled, called him brave, but he didn't smile. He thought about Reggie, about the fear, the fire, the smell of blood. He accepted the medal quietly, shook hands, and walked away. That night, he locked the medal in a box. He didn't look at it again for years. Back home, a different battle. When the war ended, Thomas came home. He thought it would be better. He imagined people cheering, waving flags, thanking him. But it wasn't like that. People looked at him with fear. Some called him a killer. Others said, "You're lying. They don't give medals to people like you." They saw his skin first, not his uniform. He tried to get a job, no one hired him. He tried to tell his story, no one listened. He once sat on a bench wearing his veteran cap, and someone threw a soda at him. He walked away. The pain of silence for years. Thomas didn't talk about the war, not even to his wife, not to his son. He worked small jobs, fixed cars, washed windows, lived quietly. But at night, the memories came back, the sounds, the faces. He often woke up sweating, gasping, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. He told himself, "I survived." That's enough. But it didn't feel like enough. He missed his friends, missed the boy he used to be. He once said to his wife, "I left one war and came home to another." Years later, a son. Lost his son, Malcolm, was just 18 when he died. He had gone to the store at night wearing a hoodie. A police officer thought he looked dangerous, thought he had a weapon. He didn't. One mistake, one moment, one bullet, and he was gone. Thomas fell to the floor when he got the news. Not a tear came out, just silence. At the funeral, he wore his old uniform for the first time in years, not for honor, but for truth. He stood next to his son's casket, a Medal of Honor on his chest, and asked one question: "If I was a hero, why wasn't my son safe?" No one had an answer. Back to the present now, sitting on the bench, Thomas folded the photo and placed it back in his coat pocket. The world had changed, but not enough. He still walked with quiet strength, still spoke with few words, still carried battles no one could see, but something was different this time. That young officer, the one who mocked him, there had been something in his eyes, a crack, a shift, like he saw the truth finally. Thomas didn't hate him. He had seen worse. But maybe, just maybe, this time someone would listen. He stood up, picked up his bag, and walked slowly into the evening light. It was late at night. The streets were empty. A single street lamp flickered near Thomas Franklin's small apartment. Inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Thomas sat on his old wooden chair, staring at the wall. His hands rested on his knees. A cup of cold coffee sat untouched on the table beside him. The apartment was full of silence, but his mind. It was loud. Voices, gunfire, screams, his son's laughter, his wife's last hug, the silence of the grave. He had survived a war overseas, but this silence, the one that followed him every day, was harder to escape. Memories that never fade. He got up slowly and walked toward the shelf. There were only a few things on it. A folded flag. A photo of Malcolm, his son, smiling in his graduation. Gown. A military medal in a dusty box. And a small note his wife once wrote, "Keep going. You're stronger than you think." He touched the photo gently. "Hey, son," he whispered. His voice cracked. Malcolm was only 18 when he died. He was smart, polite, wanted to study engineering, had dreams, all gone in one night. The night it happened. It was cold and raining. Malcolm had gone out to buy snacks. He wore a hoodie, jeans, and headphones. The police said he didn't respond when they called him, said he reached into his pocket, said they thought it was a weapon. It was just a phone, one shot, right there, on the sidewalk. Thomas ran to the hospital when he got the call, but he was too late. Malcolm was already gone. His body was cold. Thomas stared at his son for a long time, then whispered, "I fought for this country. I bled for this land. And now you're telling me it's still not safe for my son to walk outside?" No one said a word. The room was full of people, but the silence was louder than ever. No justice, just quiet. The police officer was not charged. The report said it was an accident, a misunderstanding. Thomas didn't scream. He didn't break anything. He just sat in court, holding his son's photo. People walked past him like he was invisible, a war hero, a father, a broken man. No news channels covered the story. No crowd protested. Only a few neighbors showed up at the funeral. He stood over Malcolm's grave wearing his old army uniform. He didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. He simply said, "I thought I came back from war to a safer world. I was wrong." Brad's regret grows. Meanwhile, Officer Brad sat at home, reading more about Thomas, about the war, about Malcolm. He found an article, only one, about the shooting. It was short. 2 paragraphs, no photo, no real details. Brad felt sick. He had been the one to mock this man, the one to pull rank, the one to treat a hero like dirt. And now, knowing all this, he couldn't sleep. The next day, he stood in front of the mirror in his police uniform and said out loud, "You were part of the silence." He knew he had to do something, say something, not just feel bad, act. A knock on the door. That evening, Thomas heard a knock. He opened the door slowly. Officer Brad stood there, hat in his hands, not in uniform. Thomas said nothing, just looked at him. I came to say something," Brad said. Silence. Brad looked nervous but continued. "I was wrong, sir. I judged you. I disrespected you. And after learning about your son, I realized I've been blind for too long." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "People usually don't come back to apologize." "I know," Brad replied, "but I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent." Thomas stepped aside. "Come in." The talk that changed everything. Inside, they sat, at the table. Brad looked at the flag, the photo, the quiet apartment. "This place feels heavy," he said softly. Thomas nodded. "It carries memories." They sat for a moment in silence. Then Brad said, "I want to do something, not just say sorry. I want to make sure people know your story, know Malcolm's story, the truth." Thomas stared at him for a long time. "You can't bring him back," he said. "I know," Brad replied. "But I can speak up. I can make others listen." Thomas leaned back. "That's what this world needs," he said. "Less silence, more truth. A new beginning." The next week, Brad stood in front of a room full of new police officers during training. He told them about Thomas. He told them about Malcolm. He said, "We wear uniforms, but we're not better than the people we serve. Every person has a story. Don't wait for a badge or a medal to respect someone. Respect them first. Always." Some listened, some didn't, but the silence was breaking. Thomas's walk one morning. Thomas walked to the park. He wore his army cap. People noticed him now, not for his coat or his age, but for his story. A child pointed at him and said, "Mommy, that's the soldier you told me about." A woman smiled. "Thank you, sir." Thomas gave a small nod. Thank you for seeing me. Still quiet, but not alone. The silence never fully left Thomas. It still visited at night, still echoed through the halls of his mind. But now, there were voices too. Voices telling his story. Voices remembering his son. Voices choosing respect over judgment. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. A week had passed since Officer Brad visited Thomas Franklin. The apology had been real, honest, but it was just the beginning. One evening, Brad called Thomas again. His voice was soft, respectful. "Sir, there's a community meeting next, Saturday. People are talking about change, about police and the public. I think they need to hear your story. Would you come?" There was silence on the line. Then Thomas said, "They never wanted to hear it before." Brad replied, "They do now. And if they don't, I'll make sure they do." The invitation. The meeting was being held in the city hall. A big room with a wooden stage, tall lights, and rows of chairs. Police officers, community leaders, students, and neighbors were all invited. Most came out of curiosity. Some came out of guilt. Others didn't even know why they came. One thing was sure. No one expected what was coming. Brad stood near the back, watching the door. Then he saw him, Thomas Franklin, wearing a clean black coat, his army cap on his head. He walked slowly but with strength. People turned and stared. Whispers began. "Isn't that the veteran? That's the man whose son, you know." On stage, the host of the event stood at the mic. "Tonight, we have a special guest, someone with a voice that's long been ignored. Please welcome Major Thomas Franklin." Applause. But not too loud. People were unsure. Thomas walked up the steps and stood at the microphone. His hands were steady, his back straight. He looked at the crowd, men in suits, mothers with tired eyes, officers in uniform. Then he said, "I was never meant to speak here." The room grew quiet. "When I came home from war, no one asked me what I saw, what I lost, what I carried. They only saw my skin, not my uniform. I've carried silence for 50 years, and my silence didn't protect me. It didn't protect my son." The room held its breath. Malcolm was 18. He smiled every morning. He helped his mother cook dinner. He had dreams. He was mine. And now he's gone. A woman wiped a tear from her eye. "The man who shot him said he looked dangerous." "What does that mean? A hoodie? A phone? A color?" "I carried soldiers on my back through burning forests. I risked my life for men I didn't even know, but my own son wasn't safe walking to the store." His voice didn't shake, but the room did. The truth hits hard. "This badge," he said, pulling out an old medal from his pocket, "was meant to honor me, but it never protected me. Not from judgment, not from pain." He looked at the officers, sitting near the front. "I don't want your pity. I want your listening, your action, your change. Don't just protect us. See us. Don't wait for a uniform to respect us. Start with humanity." No one moved. No one looked at their phones. Every eye was on him. A young girl stands up from the back. A teenage girl stood up. She looked nervous but strong. "Sir, I never knew about your story. No one teaches us this, but they should." Thomas looked at her, nodded slowly. "They didn't teach you because they wanted to forget. But we can't heal what we keep hiding." A shift in the room. One by one, people began to speak. A mother said, "My son is 17. I'm scared every time he goes outside." A young officer stood up. "I joined the force to help people, but I see now, help starts with how we treat people before something goes wrong." Brad stood in the back, quietly wiping his eyes. "This is what I hoped for," he whispered. "Not just a speech, a change, After the meeting, the room slowly emptied, but many stayed behind, walking up to Thomas. Some shook his hand, some hugged him, some said nothing, just stood beside him in silence. One woman in her 60s held his hand and whispered, "I lost my son, too. I thought no one would understand. Now I know someone does." Thomas nodded. "We carry the same storm, a news story." At last, the next morning, a headline appeared on a local news site. "War Hero Speaks, a Father's Pain, a City's Wake-Up Call." The article showed a photo of Thomas standing on the stage, hand on his medal, eyes full of truth. It was shared thousands of times. For once, people weren't scrolling past. They were stopping, listening, learning. Walls begin to break in. The weeks that followed, more people came forward. Other families shared their pain. A memorial was built in the park for Malcolm and others like him. Young lives lost too soon. Schools invited Thomas to speak. His story became part of lessons on truth, justice, and real history. Police departments started holding special training. See before you judge. Thomas didn't want fame. He only wanted change. The city had changed. People were still busy, still working, still walking with their heads down. But now, there was something new in the air. Awareness. Thomas Franklin's story had reached more than just a few hearts. It had touched thousands. The video of his speech at the town hall had gone viral, not because it was dramatic, not because it was loud, but because it was true. Online storm people from other cities, even other countries, started sharing his speech. Comments flooded in. "This broke my heart. I never saw it this way before. His pain is real. Why aren't we talking about this more? He fought for peace, but lost his son at home. This must stop." Journalists started calling. News stations sent requests. But Thomas wasn't chasing attention. He had one rule: I will speak, but only if it helps others feel seen, too. I'm not the only father. I'm not the only voice. The school visit one day, Thomas visited a high school. The room was full of students, teenagers, loud and restless. But when he started talking, silence fell. He spoke about Malcolm. "He was just like you. He liked music, fast food, and staying up too late." He spoke about judgment. "Some people only see danger when they look at someone like my son. That's not your fault, but it becomes your fault if you stay silent." After he finished, a boy raised his hand. "Sir, do you forgive the man who shot your son?" The room froze. Thomas thought for a moment. His voice was steady. "Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness means, I won't carry the poison forever. But that man must carry what he did, and he must change." The boy nodded. A teacher later said, "That was the most honest thing our kids have ever heard." Letters from strangers back home. Thomas received letters every day. One from a white police officer in Texas. "I used to think I knew the streets. I didn't. You opened my eyes. I'm changing how I train my team." One from a mother in Detroit. "My son died like yours. I thought no one would say his name again. Now, I feel less alone." One from a boy in Canada. "I showed your speech to my class. We talked about racism for the first time. Thank you, sir." Thomas read every letter. Some made him cry. Some gave him hope. Everyone proved something. His story was doing what silence never could. A call. From the past one evening, the phone rang. Thomas answered in his deep, quiet voice. "Hello?" A soft voice replied. "Is this Thomas Franklin?" "Yes, who's this?" "It's Charles Andrews. We served together 1971, Vietnam." Thomas stood still. "Charles? I thought you..." "Dead, almost. Got hit. Bad. I never came back to the unit. I went home broken. But I saw your video, Tom. I recognized your voice. I knew it was you." Thomas sat down slowly, his hand shaking slightly. They talked for over an hour, about the war, about life after, about how hard it was to come back to a world that didn't care. Charles said, "Back then, I thought we'd be remembered. I thought we fought for something, but seeing what happened to your son, I realized some walls never came down." Thomas replied, "Then we break them ourselves." A letter from the mayor. The next week, Thomas received an official-looking envelope. Inside was a letter from the mayor's office. "Mr. Franklin, we are creating a new city task force for community justice. We would be honored if you would serve as its first chair." Brad came by that evening. "You deserve this," he said. "You started something bigger than all of us." Thomas looked at the letter for a long time. "I didn't ask for this path," he said, "but now I know. Maybe I was always meant to walk it." Brad's new mission officer, Brad, had changed too. He was no longer the man who mocked veterans on the street. Now he visited schools, led community workshops, and helped new officers understand how to see before they judge. He started every session with the same story. "I once disrespected a war hero, but worse, I ignored a father's pain." He made sure every new officer knew Thomas by name. The park bench. One quiet morning, Thomas sat on a bench at the local park. Children ran nearby. The sun was warm. Beside him, a man sat down, young, nervous. "Are you Mr. Franklin?" "Yes," Thomas replied with a small smile. "I lost my brother last year. Police shooting. I've been angry ever since. Lost. I don't know how to live anymore." Thomas looked at him. "You don't have to know right away. You just have to keep moving forward." The young man nodded slowly. They sat in silence for a while. But it wasn't the same silence from before. This one felt lighter, full of meaning, full of healing. The wall begins to crack in City Hall. A wall had been built years ago, blank, white, cold. Now it was different. A mural was painted across it, Malcolm's face smiling. Thomas in his army uniform, children of every color holding hands. The words underneath, "See the person, hear the story, break the silence." People came to look at it every day. Some took pictures, some prayed, some just stood quietly, but no one walked past it without feeling something. The city had changed, and so had Thomas Franklin. He was no longer just a father mourning his son, no longer just a soldier with memories of war. Now he was a voice, a guide, a symbol of truth. But even symbols grow tired. Thomas was growing older. His steps were slower, his hands a bit shakier. One morning he sat by his window and looked at the rising sun. "There's one thing left," he whispered. "One last thing I must do." The plan Thomas called Brad. "I want to organize a march, not a protest, a walk, for peace, for truth, for all the sons we've lost." Brad listened in silence. "I'll help," he said. "We'll do it right." They chose a date, Sunday morning. 1 year after Malcolm's birthday. The word spread quickly. People across the city said they would come. Parents, students, teachers, veterans, police. Some were black, some white. Some had lost children. Others just wanted to stand beside someone who had. The day arrives that morning. The streets were quiet. Then slowly, people began to gather at the city park. Hundreds of them, holding signs, photos, candles. Thomas stood in front of them, holding Malcolm's photo in his hand. Brad stood beside him. No badge, no gun, just support. The crowd looked at Thomas. He looked back at them. His voice, though soft, carried through the air. "We don't walk in anger. We walk in memory, in hope, and in power. Every step we take today is for the ones who can't walk anymore." Then he turned, and the march began. The walk, they walked in silence. From the park, past the street where Malcolm had died, past the police station, all the way to City Hall. Children held hands. Mothers cried softly. Old veterans saluted as the crowd passed. Some onlookers joined in. Others stood by the sidewalk, hands on hearts. Helicopters filmed from above. News reporters whispered into microphones. But the loudest sound that day was footsteps, steady, strong, united. An unexpected visitor as they reached City Hall. The march slowed. People gathered around the steps, looking toward the stage. Then something happened. A man stepped out from the crowd. His face pale, his hands shaking. It was the officer who had shot Malcolm. Gasps spread across the crowd. Brad's hand moved slightly to protect Thomas if needed, but Thomas didn't flinch. The man walked up slowly. He held out a small, folded letter. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but I want to say his name. I want to say I was wrong." He looked around at the crowd. Malcolm Franklin. He should be here today, but I took that away, and I will carry that pain forever. Some people wanted to shout. Others wanted to turn away. But Thomas stepped forward. He took the letter. He looked the man in the eyes. "You said his name," he said quietly. "Now, live like you mean it." The last speech Thomas turned to the crowd. His voice was tired but clear. "You came here not because I asked, but because you felt what I felt. This march isn't just about my son. It's about every name this world forgot, every voice that was silenced too soon. Change doesn't come from shouting. It comes from walking together, from seeing each other, hearing each other." He lifted Malcolm's photo high in the air. "They thought his life didn't matter, but look around you now. They were wrong." A moment of silence. Brad stepped forward and asked everyone to bow their heads. For 1 full minute, the entire city was silent. No traffic, no phones, no voices, just stillness. People cried. Some prayed. Some just held each other. In that silence, something powerful happened. Peace stepped in. Thomas's quiet. Goodbye that evening, Thomas sat on his porch. The stars were bright. The night calm, Brad visited him one last time. "You did something, Tom. Something big. This city won't forget." Thomas smiled gently. "Let's hope they remember the reason, not just the man." Brad nodded. "Rest now. We'll carry it forward." Thomas looked at the sky. "I finally feel like Malcolm can rest too." 1 year later, a statue was placed in the city park. It showed a man holding a child's hand, both looking forward. On the base it read, "For every voice once silenced, for every step toward justice. Thomas Franklin, a father, a soldier, a light." Every year on that same day, people gather for the Franklin March, not to protest, but to promise they will see, listen, and stand together. The sky was cloudy. The air was quiet. A year had passed since Thomas Franklin's final march. He was no longer here. He had passed away peacefully in his sleep just 3 months after the march. No suffering, no pain, just rest. But even though he was gone, his voice remained, in stories, in memories, in change. The community center in the heart of the city, a new building opened. Its name, the Franklin Center for Justice and Peace. Inside were photos of Malcolm, of the march, and of Thomas in his army uniform. But more than a museum, it was a place to learn. Young officers came to train here. Students came to study civil rights. Families came to heal. A large quote was painted on the wall. "Don't wait for a uniform to respect someone. Start with humanity." Thomas Franklin, every visitor stopped to read it. Some even cried. Brad's new mission officer, Brad, was now Chief Brad Harris, but he still didn't wear his badge with pride. He wore it with purpose. Every week, he visited the Franklin Center. He taught a class called "Before You Judge, the Story You Don't See." He used real stories, Malcolm's, Thomas's, his own. I once laughed at a war hero, he'd tell the room. I judged a man before I even knew his name. That moment changed me forever. He always ended with this: one man can wake up a city. One father changed the way we protect our people. If he can do that, what can you do? A young girl speaks one day. During a youth event at the center, a teenage girl stood up. Her voice shook, but her eyes were brave. My brother died in a traffic stop. No one believed us. But when I read about Thomas Franklin, I knew I wasn't alone. She pulled out a small notebook. I wrote something. Can I read it? The room nodded. She read a poem called The March That Never Ends. He walked for truth, and now we run. He spoke with pain, and now we teach with love. The crowd stood up, clapping, some wiping tears. Brad whispered, he would have been proud. Malcolm's Scholarship, a new program was born. The Malcolm Franklin Scholarship each year, it was given to a student who showed courage, honesty, and a desire to change the world. The first winner? That same girl who read the poem. She said, I'm going to be a civil rights lawyer because someone walked so I could rise. A letter in a drawer, months after Thomas's death, his daughter found an old drawer in his bedroom. Inside was a sealed letter. It was addressed, to the city when I am gone. She gave it to Brad. The city council read it aloud during a memorial service. Thomas's words, if you are reading this, then my time on this earth is over, but I hope my story is not. You don't need to remember my face. Remember the reason I spoke. Fight not with anger, but with truth. Heal not by forgetting, but by remembering, and walk not alone, but together. The annual march, every year on the same day, people gather for the Franklin March. No signs, no shouting, just walking. They wear shirts with one word: listen. This year, the crowd was larger than ever. Over 5,000 people walked through the streets. Children rode on their parents' shoulders. Old veterans led from the front. A choir sang softly from a church porch. We walk for the ones who lost their breath. We speak for the ones who met silent death. But we live so others may rise again. The boy who once cried, remember. The boy who had once asked Thomas, do you forgive the man who shot your son? He was older now, in college, and this year he stood on stage at the march. Back then, I was just a scared kid with questions, he said. Now I'm a man who wants to change the system. He looked out at the crowd. Mr. Franklin taught me that one voice matters, so I'll use mine. The legacy lives Thomas. Never wrote a book. He never asked for awards, but his life became a lesson in police stations, in classrooms, in families around the world. A man who once stood in silence now echoed through generations.